We've probably all seen a bird that is able to copy speech, and you might have seen cats or dogs that are able to talk. Now, personally, I think it would be very interesting if the next development of pets was to get them to speak, because wouldn't that be kind of cool? Just have, you have a, I'm not much of a pet person, but I'm sure the pet people would like that, right? Now, who knows? Maybe it's one of those things that eventually it's like, maybe it will. You know how people marry foreigners, and then it's like, the more they kind of learn about the other person, or the more the other person speaks, the less they like them. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, but the animals that I've seen that have the ability of speech is mainly birds, certain types, and also dogs and cats seem to be able to develop that. Now, I would imagine any animal that is sufficiently developed enough or generalized enough is able to develop the ability of speech. You would assume a bug would probably not be able to, or would have a hard time. Maybe something more simplistic like a frog probably wouldn't be able to, or it would be more difficult at least, because frogs can make sounds. You know, they sound kind of like a balloon that's exhausting air. They sound very funny. So it's through the throat that the animal, the lungs and the throat and the vocal cords and such, and the mouth, that the animal is able to project the air, make the vibration, and then modulate it to change the timbre, which is changing the waveform to get different vowels and words and letters and such, consonants and all these things. Through speech therapy, you could amplify this, and of course, iodine is a mineral which is used to increase intelligence in people that are developing, specifically lingual intelligence, their ability to read and write, which in the West usually we mostly just see as intelligence. So you would need to develop the lingual, the ability of these animals to speak properly. But the bird can speak human language, but it does not think. So this is the next level. Maybe you've met a person that can speak very well, like they kind of give off like a monkeyish vibe or a parrot vibe. They can speak and they can repeat things. Children go through phases of this as well, but they are not very intelligent. There isn't much going on inside their head. They're just kind of like a music player, a recorder or something. This is because they lack the ability to think, which is the next level. Now, this almost you could see with the computer. Computers were these word input-output console machines, and then eventually they gained higher qualities of imaging, pixel imaging to make images and 3D and videos and such. And now with like LLMs were just kind of like chatbots, and now they gained the ability to think in a certain way. And then the next level is developing their spirituality. That'd be the third level, which is developing the awareness, the consciousness, the self, the sense there. Such. So, can you develop intelligence within animals? Now, if we have a look at animals that already innately have intelligence, a dolphin would probably be the obvious choice. Dolphins supposedly are quite intelligent. I forget if it's ravens or crows, but apparently they have a decent enough amount of intelligence, right? If you look at owls seem to have a look of, I don't know if it's intelligence or wisdom or spirituality or something. Same way horses have this majestic look. Some of them are very stupid. Maybe I just saw a smart horse. It was pondering, looking at the mountains for hours a day, and that gave it wisdom, because there are also some very stupid looking horses. I don't know, maybe if horses are commonly intelligent. Dogs to an extent, because they've just been around humans, and who knows, are cats intelligent? Or are they just kind of witty, is it like something like that? I'm not exactly sure. But The more that an animal is kind of domesticated and spends time around humans, the more it seems to take on human characteristics. The dog took on the social characteristic because what was it given? It was given lots of love, it was given lots of attention, it was given lots of play. The cat partially rejected some of that, and it still took on, to an extent, the social characteristics. Cats can still be loving and social in a way, but less energetic like a dog, I guess. Well, again, you look at like a turtle or a frog or a snake. These will have the capacity for social interaction. Once a snake is well fed, it's not really thinking too much about survival and all that kind of stuff. Once animals in general are fed, they're not really thinking about their survival as much, so that it can make them go to higher levels. It's the same thing with a human. People who are poor and very worried and stressed aren't really thinking about being very social or being very, in their mind, intelligent, and all this kind of stuff, unless they naturally have a leaning towards that, right? So having the animal in an optimized state where it's very comfortable, happy, probably where it has a decent social life with other animals, ideally of its own kind, is probably a good thing to build a foundation of facilitating intelligence. But you still need to stimulate the mind of the animal, because you develop intelligence by thinking, right? I probably developed a lot of my intelligence by using electronics, by being on a computer, playing video games, non-physical simulations, essentially. So hypothetically, you could get animals to develop intelligence by getting them to play video games to the point where they develop basic computer simulation skills, and then you could get them, and also you'd probably try to integrate learning of words into this as well, so they would be somewhat like you'd have intellectual educational video games, and then you have tactile ones because you want it to develop the ability to like move the cursor or something. And of course, this would be much easier through the use of brain computer interfaces. Once we have non-invasive brain computer interfaces where you could just put it on an animal and they can like move the cursor where they want, and left and right click and use all the keys, and they'll figure out somehow, you'd have a video game where it'd be like the letter R, and if they can project mentally the letter R, then it like flashes with, I don't know, whatever treats they like an image of like their favorite treat, or like an animal that's similar, like a friend or a companion animal, a 3D model render of like happy animals, to like stimulate happiness within the animal. Because you want some kind of reward feedback thing, right? But you don't want to just overfeed them, because then, you don't want to overstimulate the digestion, because we want to keep the energy in the mind, right? So everything is virtual. So I think through pretty much just putting this animal on a computer simulation for like a couple hours a day, it would have to, mentally, it would have to use its mind, because it can't use its body. Or if it uses its body to like click things, it's doing that, but it has to think, it has to develop the critical thought skills. And I do think it's possible for it to develop the critical thought skills, right? I do think that's possible. So that would be development of intelligence, right? And if you had the development of intelligence combined with understanding of language and the ability to speak, which I think you could all do for an animal, you could all develop all these things, it would be able to speak to you kind of like a human. Now, the level at which it would be able to speak to you would depend on the kind of level of consciousness, which is the next thing. Again, to use human examples, we've all met people that are very wise, very like sagely for their age, probably, right? And we've probably all met people who are very stupid for their age, or, well, not intellectually stupid, but just like childish, almost like an eternal teenager, where They just don't do the most basic things. It's like, why are you not doing that? Like, you have arms, you can use your arms. You're not stupid. You're not mentally like, they don't have mental issues, but they just have issues of internal, I don't know. So I see it as like a spiritual issue personally, which is like the third level of intelligence. Because usually meditation and development of this spiritual side, it makes you older in a way. You learn to go beyond and above, and it is the highest form of development. So it's rare to actually develop this area of yourself because it's rare to get to a point in like modern society where you can just sit and be, right? That will develop the highest part of you, the nothingness, the void part. Society is very, especially in modern society, in the past, it would have been more common actually. I think people would have been more mature in the past, but now everything's very stimulating. It brings us down to a level of like desire and want and like semi-survival. Like, oh shit, better get out of the way, there's a car coming, all right? Then, to develop this, would you make the animal meditate? Is that how it works? Would you have a person meditating in a room and then you have the animal meditating? Not sure. Now, another way that you can develop all these is actually through, as I said, iodine. If you figure out specifically a mineral that develops the speech characters, speech and language, which is iodine, and then if you find one which develops the mind, which the only one I know is like silver, I'm sure there's some other stuff, right? And then one that develops the consciousness, which I believe is gold. We'll try to find something cheaper than gold and silver, right? But these things do that, right? So if you could find things which you can give as food, which stimulate the development, the growth of animal, the same way that they develop like trenbolone, it's a steroid for cows and also horse steroids and such. So they developed all these muscle building and stamina raising and endurance raising drugs for cattle and like chickens and race horses and such to enhance their muscularity and their physical characteristics. But what about the intelligence? There's got to be stuff that increase the intelligence of animals. And the other thing would be electromagnetic stimulation, because of course, we live in the modern age. We can now use electromagnetic technology. Unfortunately, it's not really common, but you can develop this kind of stuff using coils, electromagnetic coils of certain frequencies, to stimulate the mind, the brain, the throat, the crown of the animal, and that will like energize them. It's essentially like qigong and neigong, where you focus on energy work, where you focus on an area of the body and stimulate it energetically. You're just doing this through technology, right? So then stimulating the consciousness of the animal would actually probably help to do the rest of all the development. In fact, it's possible if you stimulated the consciousness of the animal enough, it would potentially develop all these characteristics, or it would do the opposite, where it wouldn't need to develop these characteristics unless it needed those to survive, because it would be like, this kind of stupid, what am I don't need language, I don't need to pay tax. I'm a dog, or I'm a cat, or I'm a turtle, right? Like, what am I doing? What am I doing playing these weird video game simulations? I'm just gonna go play around in my pond. That's probably what it might develop, because it'll develop that intuitive, quick thought. But who knows? So there are actually ideas of animals that would practice qigong, energy cultivation. How did they do that? I don't know. Did they breathe the air and take on lots of air? Did they go around a ley line and just soak in the electromagnetism of the ley line? Did they just one day eat enough food and just kind of just stopped and thought, if I just slow down and I just stop, the world is more noticeable. But somehow they practiced spiritual techniques. I'm gonna have to try to find some source text on this actually. And apparently, some of them would develop immortality, and then they would actually develop a human body. That's the thing. In like 100 years of development, they would actually become humanoid. And this is a fascinating thing because you have to breed these animals, right? To continue the lineage because you would develop as much as you can the animal's brain the first time, and then the next animal that would come out would have a more developed brain and would be more receptive to developing the intelligence. You're essentially forcing evolution. It also asks the question of if evolution of the chimp into the human is real, which I'm kind of suspect on it. There is an interesting hypothesis of a monkey and a pig going at it and making a humanoid creature, which is fascinating. I think it's possible, but I'm not sure. Humans are very pig-like, which is interesting. At least Westerners and Asians are strangely pig-like, I guess. So, and then there's an idea that what did they say? The Thai people said they came from Naga, which Naga is like a dragon of their culture, right? So, how did humans come? And then there's the idea of the northern hyper-intelligent people coming down to the other territories and breeding with the less evolved people, and that's how kind of the Indian and I think some of the I don't know, some of the Southeast Asian, I'm not exactly sure. Maybe other Nagas, those people, the idea of a flying person, UFO, I don't know, something like that, right? So, but basically, what I'm saying is that there's got to be some kind of way to evolve an animal into. If you evolve an animal into having hyperintelligence or humanoid-like intelligence, assumably it could become humanoid. That's what I'm thinking, right? Just with like different characteristics. So I remember I had this vision that was like in other worlds, different animals evolve to become humanoid. So you've got like a world that's like fish people, another world that's like deer people, and there's like cat people and like dog people. That's a bit sus. And of course, there is the moral question, the ethical question of all this. Is that if people become intelligent and then they become kind of miserable because they're like stuck in their minds, is it ethical to give an animal intelligence? And I think it depends on how like the environment you give them, right? Personally, I'm against testing on rats. Most of the time, I just think the rats have gone through so much. There's just so many disgusting things that they've done. Rats and other animals, human test stuff. It's just not really. I don't think it's a very good thing. So, but I think, look, I think you could do a lot of these experiments humanely if you made it fun to learn this stuff. The way I see it is like it's like trying to educate a child. You want to make it fun, you want to make it rewarding, and who knows, maybe it's just naturally as intelligence develops in the world or undevelops because it looks like we're going to a world of idiocracy. Maybe animals would just develop intelligence in general, and I don't know. And then also kind of brings us to the idea of the like Japan, they have the tanuki that would shapeshift, or the foxes that would shapeshift and into human society. What's up with that? Were they like immortal foxes and raccoons, or were they just kind of hallucinating that, or just making stories? I don't know. But I don't know. It's a fascinating thing to think about, and I think it's we have the technology within like I reckon within about 30 years you could make a generation of animals that is able to just by birth just able to speak and have general level of intelligence, and you would start to see different characteristics with them because they it's kind of like royalty. People who are royals and nobles become more childlike and become more like less physical because they use their mind and their like social social abilities more to get by, so their body doesn't develop as much and they become kind of physically weaker. So I think that would be an issue where you would still have to like make sure the animal is physically training, right? You know, like take them on walks or do whatever they do, take them out to the woods every so often, right? Because you wouldn't want them to, you know, excessively get weak to the point where they couldn't live in nature. But I guess, I don't know, maybe that's what would happen. That eventually, or they would like conquer nature. Who knows? You know, maybe they become like the king. Though, of course, I maybe not. You know, there's that idea that intelligent, higher class people respect gentleness and kind of quiet and thoughtfulness and such, and people who are lower class respect like energy and power and being a dick, and you know, it's like the person who's the biggest asshole is the strongest, right? It's kind of animalistically, I don't know, maybe some animals they only respect like strength. So I don't know. It's a lot to think about. But anyway, I'll just leave you with those thoughts.